Welcome to another episode of Growth Hacker TV. I'm Bronson Taylor, and today I have Jesse Farmer with us. Jesse, thanks for coming on the program.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. We're glad to have you because you have quite a reputation around viral growth, your understanding of it, your ability to achieve it. So let's kind of start with that. That's what our audience is interested in, so let's just jump right into that. Tell us about some of the things you've started, some of the ventures you've started, and tell us about the growth those companies have had. And don't be afraid to brag.
All right, I'll do my best. So probably the most well-known thing I've worked on is I co-founded this company called Everlane, and we're like an online-only vertically integrated fashion retailer. I left there about a year ago after being there for about 2.5 years. But before I left, we had about a month before our store opened, which was November of 2011, we launched a sort of viral get into Everlane early sort of campaign. Mm-hmm. And we signed up in the course of 2 weeks, a few 100,000 people pre-launch.
Yeah.
So there were a few days where we were signing up people at a rate of like a few thousand people per hour.
Wow.
Which we didn't really expect. But for people who ever worked on the Facebook platform, one of the early things I did was this project called Adanomics, which was like an analytics platform for the Facebook platform. Mm-hmm. If you've ever used appdata.com, it's virtually the same product. But this was Adanomics was sort of the first one. I launched it in 2007. Uh-huh. So that was the environment where I learned a lot of this stuff, along with a lot of other people who were self-taught. Before that, you sort of, I mean, the Facebook platform was really the first opportunity for people to learn this on their own. Before that, you had to work for a company like Facebook or PayPal or some company that had this knowledge already baked into the team and culture.
Yeah, absolutely. So you talked about that, the initiative you guys had to drive those initial signups for Everlane even before you launched. Break that down for us a little bit. I mean, was it just a simple landing page that happened to go viral because they loved what your product was about? Or were there things that you guys did to kind of allow it to spread, which I'm guessing is what happened?
Both. I mean, I think it's a little bit like a magic act in the sense that when people see the final result, like the rabbit getting pulled out of the hat, mm-hmm. that's really all they remember. Mm-hmm. But they don't know all the work that went into creating a stage for people to be amazed. So we did literally. I mean, the page had pretty standard hooks. There were like tiered incentives: invite 5 friends, get in November 1st; invite 15, get a free T-shirt. 25, mm-hmm. I think, was like a $25 credit, and 50 was free shipping for life. Wow. So I think a lot of people mistook that for the cause, but that wasn't the cause. People were already really interested in Everlane, and in fact, about a year earlier, we built up. I don't know this for sure, but we were one of the fastest growing Tumblrs I think ever in the history of Tumblr. We had built up over the course of a month. The largest men's fashion Tumblr at the time. They're much larger ones now. Yeah. And one of the largest fashion Tumblrs overall. And that was definitely a concerted effort. Like we wrote software to do some of the stuff for us. We were really focused on what content did really well. Mm-hmm. And I think without like the 6 to 8 months of lead up of people knowing about us on Tumblr and elsewhere, they wouldn't have been interested in Everlane to begin with. Like, one of the analogies I use sometimes is it's like imagine it's like a pipe that's under a lot of pressure. Mm-hmm. That invite page is really just the pressure relief valve. Uh-huh. Like people are like, I want in, and we're like, well, just invite 5 friends and you can get in, and they'll do it. So yeah. The much harder thing was the building up the demand. The easier part was building the mechanism to release that demand. And the way I've said it, makes it sound much more confident than we were at the time. Of course, like we knew people were interested. Mm-hmm. It wasn't until this page sort of lit the fire that we saw just how interested people were.
Yeah.
So.
No, it makes a lot of sense. When you were creating the content for the Tumblr blog, was that all in-house content? Were you guys working with other people to, guest blog for you guys? What was your strategy to kind of pull together such a huge audience on Tumblr?
Uh, the content was almost entirely the work of my co-founder, Michael Praisman.
Okay.
And then I had written some software that would do standard sort of gray hat viral things like follow and unfollow people, that sort of thing on Tumblr. And we also at the time had this curator program, so you would deliberately seek out high-profile Twitter blog or Tumblr bloggers, Twitter personalities, that sort of thing, to be curators for Everlane and so on and so forth. That eventually fell to the wayside pretty quickly. But and I'll say when things wound up going viral, 95% of our traffic was from Facebook and Twitter. So so the effect our growth on Tumblr had overall is it's hard to pinpoint, except I think without it, people wouldn't have had the general interest in our brand. It's not easy to directly attribute it. Oh yeah, these people bootstrapped our viral growth process on Everlane later. That's not really what happened.
Sure, and it's probably messy because I'm sure your Tumblr was being pushed to your Twitter account, your Facebook, all those kind of things.
Yep.
So where they may have been in your world for months on Tumblr and then clicked on it from Twitter. Who knows?
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, you talked about how you really cut your teeth on the Facebook platform, but you also have another leg up, I think. You have a degree in mathematics from the University of Chicago. In your mind, do you think a degree like that, understanding of statistics, does it aid your ability to grow products? Or is it really not that big a deal and it just seems like it would be?
I think it aids me, but I think everybody relies on the tools they have. So among the people I know, I maybe I'm able to approach things more mathematically. But I know plenty of people who don't have that background and have other ways of sort of thinking through these issues. So I think if you were to talk to people who know me and work with me, they would say, maybe jokingly, when I want to be, I can be incredibly precise. I am very quickly able to identify both stated and unstated assumptions. I think I have a sort of a knack for maybe spotting patterns faster than other people. And I'll say for a 4-year math degree, that's basically what a math degree is. It's about seeing opportunities for abstraction and being really efficient at inductive and deductive reasoning. But I know other people who are much more, I'm a pretty product-centric guy too, but I know people who are product-centric, who are successful in that dimension and otherwise.
Yeah, absolutely. And well, this is another question I want to ask you, because after looking at your blog, it seems like you have kind of a high-level view of viral growth that a lot of people don't have. So I wanted to ask you specifically to explain viral growth to us. What is it? And then I also know that you mentioned frictionless communication when you talk about it sometimes. What do those things mean?
Sure. So at a high level, viral growth is it's as old as time itself. You basically take some social network where we define a social network to be as broad as possible. So the U.S. Postal Service would be an example. Basically anywhere there's an opportunity for two people to communicate with each other, or one person to communicate at other people. And one person on that network starts doing something, behaving in a certain way. And in the same way, I actually just got over a flu, so I have sort of disease on the mind. But in the same way that a flu isn't an epidemic, it's something called it's pandemic, in the sense that every person who gets infected with the flu generally infects about one other person. So it tends to never grow or shrink, but just sort of float around the world, continuously infecting everybody. If it's more than one, then it will slowly grow to encompass every single person. And so that situation, that number, sometimes called the K factor, sometimes called the reproduction number, sometimes called the viral coefficient, is what we measure. It's basically the ratio of however many people are doing something, the ratio of however of the number of people doing something to the number of new people who start doing it as a result of it.
Yeah.
So if that's sort of the basic math. And I forget the second half of what you said.
The frictionless communication.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Right. So in most sort of viral, if you're designing, let's say, something to facilitate this communication, there's sort of two opposing forces. There's, if you remember your high school chemistry, right, there's this idea of like activation energy. So you have maybe two molecules that are sort of bound together really tightly, and a third one hitting it. And unless that third one is moving fast enough, it's not able to, doesn't have the energy to break these different bonds. And so it's the same way when people are, for example, deciding to sign up for a new service or share something with their friends. There's a thing pushing them, which is their inherent motivation to overcome whatever hurdles might be in their way. But there's also friction in the opposing direction. So when you're thinking about optimizing a flow, you can think about increasing one. What can I do to make people more interested, so that maybe they'll be willing to do more in order to get whatever they think they can get, or making it cost less, so to speak. So.
Gotcha.
So those are usually the two knobs you're playing with.
Yeah, so you're either reducing friction or increasing energy. You got to do one or the other to kind of break through and get something moving forward.
And ideally both. I mean, usually a combination of both.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to ask you about one of the misconceptions of viral growth. I noticed also online you talked about how it's not really exponential, that we sometimes use the words interchangeably. It's exponential, it's viral, and they mean the same thing to us. It's a hockey stick. But you talk about a plateau. What do you mean by that?
Sure, it's. I don't think this will be surprising to anyone who's experienced it, but
no.
Obviously, something can't grow exponentially forever. You'll just exhaust the. There's 6 billion people. Once you have 6 billion monthly active users, there's nowhere more to go. So, in that sort of silly thought experiment, you could imagine sort of like hockey stick and then ceiling. That's obviously not how it really happens. There's you can think of it like, what's a good example? Oh, the Harlem Shake. Let's take the Harlem Shake.
All right, why not?
Right? Yeah. That there's a certain subset of the population who is ever even possibly going to adopt that behavior. Like my parents are, for example, sort of already immune to adopting that behavior. They're never going to do the Harlem Shake. So you're never talking about 6 billion people. You're already talking about some predefined ceiling that's much smaller. And instead of getting what happens is you don't get this literally an exponential curve. You have some resource that is being consumed, some population that is growing, and once those two things, you get, it's called a logistic curve or an S curve, but it becomes exponential, and then as the ratio of whatever the material is supporting that population declines, as the population grows, it starts to plateau out. And when we're talking about the use of a product, generally, unlike living organisms, it doesn't reproduce forever. So once you hit that plateau, your user base can start to sort of evaporate. Like what sort of, imagine there's a site that only 1 million people in the world are ever going to use it. Once you have those 1 million people signed up, every user who churns will be like a little knock off the top. So there's a point in any website's growth, usually earlier than people expect, where engagement becomes more important than raw growth. There's an argument that it always should be, right? But that even at the strictest mathematical level, you need people coming back and re-engaging with your product because you're you're not acquiring enough. The velocity at which you're acquiring new users is now decelerating.
Yeah, you're optimizing for the later parts of the funnel now, not just the acquisition on the very front end, because you've kind of
Yeah.
exhausted it. It's just not there. Now, let me ask another practical question about the curves of actual growth that you've seen. You talked about how there is a plateau. Do you see mini plateaus when you look at, when you have millions of monthly active users, but to get there, did you plateau and then you had another ramp up and another plateau, or was it a nice smooth S curve, just practically speaking, because you've seen curves bigger than what a lot of other people have seen. You know what I mean?
Sure. So yeah, the models we use to describe this stuff and the math is always much neater than the reality,
Yeah.
And I've seen both. I've seen curves which don't even have a plateau. They look like they wind up looking something like this.
Uh-huh.
For example,
Yeah.
I've seen things that are much, much slower where the sort of the beginning tail could be years long.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, in many ways, Everlane was that. Like we didn't launch our first sale. Obviously, we were selling physical goods, right? So it's not just, hey, let's iterate fast on some social application we've built.
Mm-hmm.
There's like capital constraints and cost of goods sold and all these things that have to figure into it.
Mm-hmm.
But or like even something that's not constrained that way, like Airbnb is a good example where they had basically 3 years before it started taking off.
Mm-hmm.
So you see all types, and also in terms of sort of what population is sort of susceptible to your product.
Mm-hmm.
Oftentimes these things are big step functions in a product's growth. So something like Twitter might be a good example where if you were to look at Twitter's growth curve, there's actually a pretty discrete moment in time, basically when Oprah started using Twitter,
Mm-hmm.
where it's following a certain kind of curve, which is it's viral. It's clearly viral.
Mm-hmm.
Then Oprah happens, and it's all of a sudden it's on a new plane. So
Yeah.
pretty much any permutation of events you can imagine, you can find some product which will has like embodied that.
Yeah, thanks for elaborating on that, because I wanted to ask you that because a lot of entrepreneurs are looking at their own curves and they're comparing them to these perfect mathematical drawings that others are blogging about, and it never matches up, and it either gives them too much confidence or they're too discouraged, and probably neither of those are good. That the growth you have is the growth you have, and that's what you're working with. When you start a new project and you're considering its potential for growth, you have all this experience that you're bringing in to deciding, am I going to work with this project? Am I going to take it on? What are some of the factors you consider? What do you look at in a new product or a new idea that make you think, all right, this has legs, this could grow, this might work? Or you see it and you're like, all right, this is dead. It doesn't really have potential, even though everybody's really excited about it. What factors really get your attention?
That's a good question, because I think I've experienced enough where, so I won't go into the whole story, but maybe we can talk about it later. I was starting a company with some friends, and we had like a Facebook application to create polls, which had like 10, 15 million monthly active users. And that happened over the course of like a month, basically. It was sort of like day 1, 0, end of month, 15 million.
Wow.
And it sort of it collapsed just as quickly, right? That is to say, I've experienced enough things like that, and seen enough things like that where growth per se, like even if I see something growing really fast, you can sometimes there's a smell of it doesn't feel like this has the fundamental hook that is really necessary for something being long term. Like honestly, like chat roulette for me would fall into that category. Like when turntable.fm came out, I felt the same way, where it's growing, and the product's kind of cool, but it feels less like oh my, holy cow, this is something really new. There's something like viscerally profound about what the product is doing, and it seems more like, oh, this is cool. And this is cool. Like those things tend to come and go. And I think people confuse the sort of the smoke and the fire, so to speak. Like the converse is true too, right? You see things like Instagram and Facebook sort of growing exponentially, and people are just as prone to say the opposite, which is like, oh, this is just a fad. Oh, this isn't, right? So that's, I guess, a long-winded of saying, like, growth alone isn't a strong enough indicator to differentiate those two categories of product. Like, there's something fundamental about Instagram, even though early on the growth curves of, like, say, Instagram and Turntable were very similar.
Yeah.
But there's something different about those products. If I had like a scientific method to figure those things out, I would obviously I'd be a very wealthy man. But there is a bit of a spidey sense for me personally. The thing that's always worked for me is I think Peter Thiel he had this a great concept of, successful companies know something that nobody else does. Like they have a secret. It might not be literally a secret. It might just be something they believe, which is true, that everyone else believes is false. So Google believed they could make money off of search. Everyone else is like, no, it's impossible. But they knew something nobody else did. And I really think that's true. And when I'm looking for stuff for me to do, the thing that interests me the most personally are like both Everlane and Dev Bootcamp, which is what I'm working on now, fall into this category of taking something sort of that straddles two dramatically different fields, where people in Silicon Valley thought it was weird that we were vertically integrating, like that we were making clothes, and people in retail were like, I don't quite get why this is what's so special about this website you're making. And sort of trying to find that middle ground where the intersection of these two fields is more interesting than sort of either one of them alone.
Yeah. No, I think that's a great answer. It really gives us a window into your mind. And you used a word there, something's visceral. And I think that's what it comes down to. I was just like you. I used Turntable, and it was cool, and I liked it. But every time I used it, I liked it less. And then eventually I just didn't care anymore. And I can't quantify that. I don't know what that equation is, And yet I know it's there when I see it. So I think you're absolutely right about those things. You're also a growth hacking consultant on Clarity FM. And I was looking through some of the comments that people left on your profile there, and they were all just glowing. It was one of the best conversations I had. He's a wealth of information. He really challenged us. I mean, people really enjoyed their time with you as a paid consultant on Clarity. And so I want to ask you, what advice do you find yourself giving kind of over and over to startups that want to grow? I'm sure there's some common threads that you could just kind of hit record and then play it back for them on every conversation.
It really depends on what stage the product is at. So some of the people I talked to on Clarity were still exploring their ideas. And a lot of it resonates around similar themes, like what would be a good example? So, for example, oftentimes when people are first starting out, when they talk to me, especially because of my math background, and I used to do stuff in analytics, they want to know, what about A/B testing? What things should I test? And I'll say early on that the quantitative approach is not generally as useful as a more sort of ethnographic approach, like more anthropological approach, where you have to sort of look for more qualitative signals. Things like, are there people who for some reason really love or like just have a strong reaction to your product, whether it's love or hate, or do most people are most people indifferent? But early on, it tends to be more about looking for outliers. And oftentimes people they just want to know, like, we'll iterate our way to success. I know some people who have managed to do that. It's always been really hard for me. It's much easier to first try to figure out sort of what the thing is that's like hitting people in the gut, and then once you have that kernel, try to grow it out from there. Another common theme is trying to talk to people about sort of what, like, Warren Buffett always says he likes to invest in companies with moats, like companies that have sort of a natural defense. Like Coke has their brand. There's nothing is going to assail that. Yeah. So that, I think that's also that's just as true in startups. But it tends to look more like why is something like YouTube more valuable than something that aggregates videos from across a wide range of sites? Or why is something like Groupon, ignoring sort of whatever their recent financial stuff, but in theory, in a world where Groupon is like a valuable thing, why are they more valuable than a site that aggregates daily deals? Like I think fundamentally it's because they have the raw material, like the other people are building stuff on. It's so I was talking with someone who's trying to build a social network, for example, and he was trying to sort of get everyone under the sun to use it. And it's like, well, look, you have it was a social network for like medical professionals, and there was a certain class of medical professional that he really wanted on the site. And so my advice to him was basically, you should go after them, because one, you can go out of your way to make them feel special. Like this isn't just, hey, you're one among a million. You're like one among 10,000. These are your peers, and you're awesome. So of course you want to be awesome on my site. And it makes it easier to build a product because now you're building it for fewer people. In addition, you have access to these people whose opinions like industry cares about, right? You now have this resource that you can basically start charging access for. So that's also a pretty common theme. Another common theme which is sort of what's happening right now. So much of the advice is really product specific. So it's like really deeply tied to the psychology of the user base, and giving advice divorced from that, it comes off almost as like just cliche, meaningless, vague phrases. It's hard to see how to take the general approach and apply it to a specific situation. So I usually try to get, when I'm talking with people, hone in right on that. Like I need to talk really specifically about who your customers are, because any advice I would give you in general you would almost laugh at how almost useless it felt. Like, oh really? Is this what we're talking about?
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. Let me ask you this: when you're on calls with startups, you know what you know. Like, you understand where your expertise lies. What questions do you wish they would ask you? You get on the phone and they're worried about X, and you know that Y is the thing that's going to kill them, or you know that Y is where you really add value. Are there any questions that you're like, oh, I'd just love to get on a phone call and they'd ask me X, Y, and Z, because then they'd walk around with some actionable information? Or does anything come to mind?
Nothing comes to mind immediately, to be honest. I would say, it depends on what their specific mindset is. So, one thing I'm actually, maybe to the surprise of many people, I'm sort of skeptical of is a purely metrics driven approach. I think most people don the cloak of being data driven and they justify that by saying like, well, we're going to do away with politics. We'll let data make the decisions. But most people don't really do that. They wind up in the same politics, just using a sort of a different language. Like they're still making the same arguments. They're just now using this seemingly objective numbers. Well, it's numbers. It's objective, of course. And to try and get people to really truly think deeply about like what these numbers are sort of really saying. And if you dive in deep enough into math and statistics, it can it can quantify its own uncertainty. So you can be precise about when you need to make a judgment call. So one piece of advice I often give is like, the most important thing is knowing when you're making a data-driven decision and knowing when you're making a judgment call, and like being okay making a judgment call, but don't making a judgment call. Don't be like, well, you can't make a decision until we have data, or here's some half-baked data that I'm going to use to make myself more comfortable, and then make what is actually really a judgment call. Like no, this isn't enough to help you make the decision. Just make the frickin' decision. So oftentimes I push people in that direction. Sometimes I give them more tactical advice, like people really like comparing how they're doing to other applications, but things like the viral coefficient, it actually doesn't make sense to compare it from sort of application to application. There's so many details that vary, or I get annoyed when people sometimes use meaningless metrics like average number of friends invited, which the curve for most invites, if you were to make like a histogram where the bottom was number of friends invited, and then the height was like the number of people who invited that many. So 0, 1, 2, 3. That in every viral application, that's this super stark power curve. So it's like 50% invite nobody, 25% invite 1, 12.5% invite 2, and so on. Way down at the end of the line, way down there, there's like 4 people, your whales, who invited 5,000 people.
It skews the median.
It does, and I mean the median would be actually slightly better, but the mean for sure is a lie. Like basically, when the mean and median agree is when you have a bell curve, but you don't have a bell curve anymore. So it's more dangerous than just being wrong. It actually like puts you in the wrong mindset, because the average number of friends invited is going to be some ridiculously low number, like 2 or 3, and so you'll start thinking things like, well, look at all these people who haven't invited anybody. What if we got half of them to just invite 1? What would that do to our viral coefficient? And you start thinking of all these cockamamie features to just get people just inviting 1 friend, and never really thinking like, well, 1, is it harder to make half of these zeros invite 1 than making this person who invited 500 invite 750? Probably it's easier. And also, these people who invited nobody are the people, it's like people who didn't invite anybody are people who didn't care about your application in the first place. And like the people who invited 1 are the people who accidentally clicked invite all their friends. Like it's not until you get up to 5, 10 that it's actually people who are for some reason opting into this process of yours. So it's oftentimes like I love having those conversations with people when they're open to them, of being like, you actually have to be careful about how you think about numbers, not just because it might not be accurate, but it actually puts you in a mindset where you're contemplating rubbish features.
That's great insight. Absolutely, thank you for that. Data-driven is a mask that can cover up a lot of sins. So thanks for showing us some of those. I had another question I want to ask you about Everlane, and then I want you to tell us a little bit about Dev Bootcamp, what you're currently focused on. With Everlane, you kind of already talked us through the initial growth, the Tumblr, the launch page, some of the incentives, and that kind of system. After that kind of was over, or plateaued, whatever, or that segment of growth was over, where did you guys really see your growth coming from after that, as it started to mature more, as the product was out there in the world? Did you guys dive into pay-per-click or social or PR, content? Did you keep doing content? What was the main channel you guys really honed on once you got some traction there?
So for Everlane, the raw viral growth tapered off by a fair amount. I mean, it was still like 10x, 20x what it was before the launch in terms of daily growth. But the biggest hook was get in early, and so we launched, and there's no more getting in early. Every once in a while, there was an opportunity to have that kind of thing again, like get early access to some upcoming collection, that sort of thing. But for the most part, the three main channels for Everlane were, I mean, it remained social, so we remained super engaged, but in a more community management kind of way, and less in a, hey, let's think of clever viral tricks kind of way. Content, and then sort of PR and earned media were sort of the three main channels. So what we were doing was interesting enough that people wanted to write about what Everlane was doing and what Everlane meant about the future of retail online and that sort of thing. So
yeah. When you say community management, what did that look like? Was it just really good customer support, or do you mean much more than that?
No, that's definitely a big part of it. So sort of from start to finish, I mean, so at Everlane, I was responsible for essentially the website, and like that website is to Everlane what like the Apple Store is to Apple, or what the J. Crew store is to J. Crew. It's you walk in, and it should be like, as soon as you cross that threshold, you realize you're in some new, hopefully amazing universe that really speaks to you.
Yeah. So
we tried to, from start to finish, make like sure every experience was on the nose in terms of aligning with what we were trying to do. I annoyed the crap out of our team probably with how obsessed I was over our checkout flow, all that kind of stuff, including. So customer support was all a part of that, and we would do little things like I wish I had some Everlane stuff here with me right now, but there were little notes that went out in all the things we shipped. So we just tried to, we saw it more of as a like it's like a luck is sort of like a surface area, right? It's the more things like that you do, the more likely some amazing thing is going to happen. So we just tried to have as many sort of novel, exciting touch points, and it made people feel sort of pretty special.
Yeah.
But our website was differentiated enough, and our like onboarding experience, which our first onboarding experience was designed and built almost totally by one of our lead engineers, non-you. So people like really loved that. There was sort of interactive graphic. You click on, it would sort of tell the Everlane story and why we're cheaper and that kind of stuff. And so those little touches like that really made people go like, holy crap. And then, yeah, also, I mean, just like active on Facebook and Twitter. We learned really early on the power sharing information and this seems almost silly in retrospect, but sharing information in a shareable way. Like when we make announcements now, we almost always just publish an image because an image is way easier to share than a bunch of text.
Okay.
Like you can like repost it to your Facebook wall, you can forward it to your friend, it's on your phone, you can like text it to someone. And,
yeah.
I mean, it's basically why infographics work.
Yeah, well, you actually didn't you have a really popular infographic? I'm just now remembering, and forgive me if I'm thinking of another company.
No, we did, yeah.
Yeah, it was a pipeline of like actually how much it cost another company to manufacture all these things, how much it cost to dye the shirt, why you're paying such a huge markup. People went crazy over that.
They did, yeah. That we deliberately sort of wanted to cause a stir. I mean, part of our brand from day one was about, I think, anytime someone's thinking about branding, you always sort of want to look where everybody is and then try to not move like 180 degrees, but sort of move 90 degrees to that. So when you look at retailers of Everlane's caliber, they tend to be more aloof, less transparent, less human feeling. And so we decided, okay, well, we have to be all more of those things. And especially on the web where things like transparency, openness, the feeling that people are getting access to information that was kept a secret before.
Yeah.
Even though it wasn't really, I mean, it was, but you had to really dig for it to find it.
Which
no one was
people weren't going
broadcasting.
to. Yeah.
Right, exactly. So being able to sort of package that and put it all in one place is something that, and contextualize it the way we did, is something no one had done in that way before.
Mm-hmm.
At least not really a retail brand. And people, some of our competitors got frustrated by it because it sort of it implied that they were charging too much.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that definitely sparked off a bunch of sort of attention.
No, that's great. Well, let me ask you about what you're working on right now. You're working on Dev Bootcamp.
Yep.
So you're not active with Everlane day to day. Now it seems like you're really pouring your energy into Dev Bootcamp. So tell us, what is it? When did it start? And use this to recruit some people.
Woohoo. Okay, so all right. Dev Bootcamp is a 9-week, incredibly intense training program for junior software engineers. I started it about a year ago, along with my co-founders Sharif Bichet and Dave Hoover, and it's actually been a year last January. And if you subscribe to the sort of Malcolm Gladwell 10,000 hours of deliberate practice thing, then Dev Bootcamp is basically the first 1,000 hours. So these 9 weeks are super intense. For the students who come in looking for a job, our placement rate is about 90%. So 90% of them leave Dev Bootcamp with a job inside 2 or 3 months after graduating. And companies who have hired from us include, Twitter, Hipmonk, Exec, Pivotal Labs, Thoughtbot, Climate Corporation, Tapjoy. I don't know the list. I can go on with the list, but companies of that caliber. So education is something I've been really interested in. Curriculum, pedagogical philosophy, theory of education. And in fact, I've had jobs where when I was bored, I would rent out tutoring services for myself on Craigslist.
Uh-huh.
So I sort of decided to make a job for myself where teacher Jesse gets to come out and play along with entrepreneur Jesse and product Jesse and whatever engineer Jesse. So.
Yeah, that's great. Tell us logistically how it works. Do they move to where Dev Bootcamp is? Are they doing it long distance? Logistically, how does it break down?
Yeah, so it's in location. Right now we have a location in San Francisco at California and Grant in Chinatown. We're opening up a new location in Chicago on April 22nd. And people move. So far they've moved to San Francisco. We graduated about 120 students last year. We'll be graduating 2 to 3 times that this year. And about half our students, ignoring the people who have already applied to Chicago, just San Francisco, about half the students are from the Bay Area, about 45% are from other parts of the United States, and 5% are from other countries.
Yeah. And who should be applying, just so people watching this know if they're in the market, if they're in your target market? Are you looking for people right out of high school? Are you looking for people with a little bit of experience? What are you really going after here?
We're looking for anyone who sort of knows in their heart of hearts that they want to be a software engineer, regardless of age or background. The youngest student we've had is 17. The oldest we've had is 56. So the median age is mid-late 20s, so like 27 to 30. Usually about, it depends again. Like, so our first Chicago class, for example, most of the students are over 30. And from class to class, it varies. So sometimes it's younger, sometimes it's older, but that's roughly the age. I mean, there are a handful of buckets. So some people do it. We've had students do it between high school and college. We've had people do it right after college. We've had people do it sort of 3 to 4 years into their career, saying like, this isn't what I wanted to do. We've had other people for whom this is their second or third career transition. We had like a former attorney who's worked at a lot of top Silicon Valley law firms, go on to be an engineer at Tapjoy, for example.
That's great. What's the website where people can go to apply for that?
It's Dev Bootcamp, DevBootcamp.com, Dev Bootcamp.
Perfect. This has been an awesome interview. Let me ask you one last question to kind of wrap it up and put a bow on it.
Absolutely.
What's the best advice you have for anyone that wants to create a company that has the potential to grow? What would you say to them?
Be able to answer the question, like, really fundamentally understand why what you think you're doing will work, why this thing above all other things, and don't be tempted by stories of amazing, explosive, quick viral growth. It's almost always a double-edged sword, in the sense that companies who look for growth first, who look for growth and then decide what to do based on what winds up growing, oftentimes their products feel a lot more hollow, and they're less sustainable because they don't have a core. It's like a house without a foundation. So I would encourage people to, like, sort of really fundamentally understand what mission they're on before they decide, okay, it's like mission first, and then figure out your whatever tactics you want to do to make that mission succeed, rather than let the tactics dictate the mission.
Perfect. Thank you again for coming on the show, Jesse. It's been awesome.
Yeah, my pleasure.